Hello, my dear friends. Feel the warmth of the Cretan sun on your skin, a gentle, honeyed heat that seems to rise right from the ancient stones beneath your feet. The air is thick with the scent of the sea, wild thyme, and something else, something impossibly old. This is the world of the Minoans, a civilization so ancient it was a myth to the classical Greeks themselves. We're going to peel back the layers of gold and legend to find the strange, mundane, and often grimy reality underneath. You're just a visitor, drifting through time, which is probably for the best. If you actually had to live here, with its curious customs and even more curious smells, you probably wouldn't last the week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It lets me know that these quiet journeys into the past are something you want to continue. Now, find that perfect spot. Let your head sink into your pillow and your muscles unwind. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing at the edge of a great courtyard, the heart of the legendary palace of Knossos. This is the place you've read about, the supposed home of King Minos and his terrifying minotaur. The myth paints a picture of a deliberate, devious labyrinth designed to confuse and entrap. But as you look around, you don't see a maze so much as a beautiful, sprawling chaos. The palace rises around you not in a single, unified design, but as a multi-story collection of rooms, halls, staircases, and porticos, all connected in a way that feels more accidental than intentional. The famous columns, tapering oddly from top to bottom, are painted a deep, earthy red. They seem to glow against the brilliant blue of the Aegean sky. The air here in the central court is fresh, carrying that promised scent of salt and sun-baked herbs. You can hear the distant bleating of goats and the murmur of voices from 100 open doorways. It feels alive. Powerful. This is the image of Minoan Crete we all hold in our minds, sophisticated, artistic, open to the sky and the sea. You imagine the king and queen presiding over grand ceremonies here, the sunlight glinting off their golden armlets, the air filled with the music of lyres and the scent of blooming lilies from nearby gardens. This is the glamorous illusion, the postcard from 3,500 years ago. But you're not here to stand in the courtyard. You're here for the secrets. So, you turn from the bright, open space and step through a doorway into the palace proper. And the first thing that hits you is the smell. The clean, salty air is gone, replaced by a thick, heavy atmosphere that clings to the back of your throat. It's a complex and deeply unpleasant bouquet. There's the foundational smell of damp, cool stone and packed earth. Layered on top of that is the unmistakable, sour tang of human waste. While Knossos was famous for its advanced terracotta plumbing, a marvel of its time, it was still a system prone to clogs, leaks and backups. The waste from hundreds, perhaps thousands, of residents had to go somewhere, and the drains often ran directly beneath the floors of these lower corridors. The smell would have been a constant, inescapable companion, seeping up through the flagstones. You try to breathe through your mouth, but that only introduces new dimensions to the experience. Now you can taste the acrid smoke from countless cooking fires, the metallic scent of blood from a nearby storeroom where an animal was just butchered for the evening's feast, and the cloying sweetness of perfumed oils and incense burned in a desperate and failing attempt to mask the underlying reality. It's the smell of too many people living too closely together. Long before the invention of modern ventilation or sanitation, you press onward, deeper into the so-called labyrinth. The corridors are narrow and dark. The famous Minoan lightwells, brilliant shafts designed to bring sunlight down into the heart of the structure, only serve to illuminate the grandest halls and apartments. Down here, in the functional arteries of the palace, you are in near total darkness, feeling your way along the slick, grimy walls. The floor is uneven, and you stumble on a loose stone. You realize the labyrinth wasn't a trap for a mythical beast. It was simply the result of centuries of unplanned renovations. A wing was added here for a growing bureaucracy. A new set of storerooms was dug out there to hold tribute of olive oil and wine. A staircase was rerouted when a section of the palace collapsed. The result is a disorienting, nonsensical floor plan that even the residents probably had trouble navigating. There are dead ends, staircases that lead to nowhere, and rooms that can only be accessed by walking through other, more private chambers. This wasn't a prison for a monster. It was the Bronze Age equivalent of a rambling old house that has been added onto by generations of owners with no master plan. The confusion, the darkness, the oppressive closeness, this was the daily reality for the servants, the guards, and the scribes who kept the palace running. The grand, airy apartments of the elite were a world away from these cramped, stinking service corridors. The myth of the labyrinth was likely born from the terrified whispers of outsider traders or tributaries who got lost in these dark, smelly passages and mistook administrative chaos for malevolent design. As your eyes adjust, you notice the walls aren't bare. Even down here, they are covered in paintings, in frescoes. The plaster is cracked and stained by moisture, but the colours are still visible in the gloom. You pass a depiction of dolphins leaping through a stylized sea, then a procession of men carrying jars. You hold your breath against the foul air and hurry down the corridor, your hand tracing the cool, damp plaster. Just ahead, a flicker of torchlight catches a flash of brighter colour, a painting of elegant, serene women in a field of purple flowers, their hands gracefully harvesting the delicate blossoms. They seem so clean, so calm, so entirely untouched by the grime and the stench of the world you're currently in. But their otherworldly peace, you will soon discover, is not what it seems. You pause in the dim, foul-smelling corridor, your attention captured by that single, remarkable fresco. It's known as the Saffron Gatherer. The figure depicted is androgynous, but often interpreted as a young priestess or perhaps an acolyte in service to the great goddess. She moves through a field of stylized crocuses, the source of precious saffron. Her movements are a study in serene grace. One hand delicately plucks the red-gold stigma from a purple blossom, while the other empties a basket of the vibrant threads onto the ground, where they are gathered by a mythical blue monkey. The entire scene is bathed in an ethereal calm. The priestess' skin is a flawless, almost supernatural white. Her lips are a perfect, blood-red bow. Her hair is intricately coiled and decorated. She is the picture of purity, of gentle communion with nature, a silent poem painted on plaster. This is the Minoan ideal of divine service, clean, peaceful, beautiful. An elegant dance between humanity and the sacred earth. But you lean closer, the torchlight flickering over the ancient paint. You notice the priestess' eyes. They are wide, dark and unfocused, gazing at nothing in the physical world. This is not the calm gaze of someone picking flowers. It is the vacant, inward stare of someone in a trance. The shocking reality behind this serene image is not one of peace, but of potent, mind-altering ritual. Saffron, the very substance she is harvesting, is more than just the world's most expensive spice. In large enough doses, it is a powerful drug. Consumed as a strong tea or infusion, it can induce euphoria, disorientation, and vivid hallucinations. The priestesses were not just gathering a commodity for trade, they were harvesting the key to the spirit world. Imagine her, not in the gentle quiet of this painting, but in a sacred chamber, drinking a bitter, saffron-laced brew. The world around her would begin to soften and warp. The sounds of the palace would fade into a dull hum, replaced by a rushing in her ears. Colours would intensify, patterns on the walls seeming to breathe and shift. She would feel a profound detachment from her own body, becoming a hollow vessel, ready for the goddess to speak through her. This ethereal state was not a gift of serene piety. It was a chemically induced high, a deliberate journey into altered consciousness that likely left her nauseous, dizzy, and exhausted for days afterward. And her perfect complexion. That too is a toxic illusion. The brilliant, paper-white skin so prized by the Minoan elite and depicted in their art was achieved with a cosmetic paste called ceruse. Its primary ingredient was white lead. Every morning, the priestess or noblewoman would sit before a polished bronze mirror and slather this thick, poisonous cream onto her face, neck, and chest. It was the Bronze Age equivalent of a heavy, full-coverage foundation, creating a smooth, artificial, mask-like perfection. It covered blemishes, yes, but it also relentlessly poisoned her. The lead would be absorbed directly through her skin. Over time, it would cause her hair to fall out in patches, her gums to rot and turn black, and her skin to develop weeping sores and lesions, which, of course, required an even thicker layer of the white lead paste to conceal. The neurological damage was even more insidious. It would lead to tremors, confusion, sharp pains in her limbs, and a slow descent into madness. The very substance used to create an image of divine purity and untouchable beauty was actively, grotesquely destroying her from the inside out. The serene figure in the fresco is a lie. She is a woman in a drugged stupor, her face a mask of poison that is slowly eating her alive. Why would they subject themselves to this? The reasons are wrapped up in power, religion, and the absolute necessity of separating the sacred from the mundane. The trance was not for pleasure. It was a vital religious duty. To be a conduit for the divine, one had to first step outside the normal bounds of human consciousness. The psychoactive properties of saffron were a technology for achieving this, a sacred tool for opening a doorway to the gods. It was a terrifying, physically taxing ordeal, but essential for maintaining the cosmic order. The poisonous makeup served a similar purpose. The stark white skin and bold red lips were not just fashion. They were a uniform, a ritual mask that transformed a mortal woman into a divine effigy. It visually declared her as other, not a common labourer who toiled in the sun, but a sacred being who lived in the rarefied air of the palace sanctuary. This inhuman perfection was a political and religious statement, a necessary illusion to command awe and reverence from the common populace. Her personal suffering was irrelevant in the face of this greater need. Her slow, painful decay was simply the price of being close to the gods. You pull back from the wall, the beautiful image now tainted with a grim understanding. The saffron she gathers, so valuable and rare, would be stored in the palace treasuries alongside fragrant oils, fine textiles and precious metals. These were the goods that fueled the Minoan economy, the treasures that filled the holds of their mighty ships, sending Cretan influence across the entire Mediterranean. You can almost smell the cedar wood and tar of those ships, a scent that promises an escape from the stale, perfumed poison of the palace. But the reality of life aboard those vessels, you suspect, was just as far from the glamorous illusion of power as the priestess was from her painted ideal. Leaving the fresco of the saffron priestess behind, you follow the narrow corridor as it slopes gently downward. The air begins to change again. The thick, cloying miasma of the palace interior gives way to a fresher, sharper scent, the unmistakable smell of salt, damp wood, and distant fish. You emerge from a low doorway onto a bustling stone quay. Before you lies the harbour of Knossos, a site of legendary power. The stories tell of a mighty Minoan fleet, a thalassocracy, a sea empire that ruled the Aegean without rival. You look out and see the vision made real. Dozens of ships bob at their moorings, their high, curving prows shaped like the heads of stylized birds or serpents. Their single, square sails are neatly furled around the masts, and their hulls are painted with enigmatic symbols, sacred double axe, swirling spirals and staring, watchful eyes. This is the glamorous illusion of Minoan sea power. A fleet of sleek, fast ships crewed by confident mariners who knew the sea's every secret. You can almost picture them, gliding effortlessly from Crete to Egypt, from the Cycladic Islands to the coast of Anatolia, their holds laden with beautiful pottery, precious saffron, and fine bronze weapons. They were the masters of the Mediterranean, their power so absolute that their cities and palaces, like Knossos, needed no defensive walls. Their navy was their wall, a floating fortress that kept all enemies at bay. The sun glints off the calm harbour waters, the painted eyes on the ships seem to wink with confidence, and the whole scene radiates an aura of untouchable, peaceful authority. But you have a pass to go aboard. You walk up a creaking wooden gangplank onto the deck of a typical Minoan trading vessel, and the grand illusion shatters into 1,000 grimy, uncomfortable pieces. The first thing you notice is the size. From the shore, the ship looked impressive. Up close, it's shockingly small and cramped. The deck is barely wide enough for two people to pass each other, and it's cluttered with coils of stiff, fibrous rope, clay jars lashed to the railings, and spare oars that seem to trip you at every step. There is no grand captain's cabin, no sheltered helm. The entire ship is open to the elements, save for a small, shallow hole beneath your feet. Then, the reality of the cruise experience hits you. You find a spot to sit on a rough-hewn bench, and as the ship gently rocks at its mooring, you feel a premonition of the misery to come. Now imagine this small, open boat in the middle of the Aegean, caught in a sudden squall. There is nowhere to hide. Icy waves would crash over the low sides, soaking every man and every piece of cargo. The wind would tear at the single, unwieldy square sail, threatening to snap the mast. The sailors, clinging to the rigging or pulling desperately at the heavy steering oar, would be freezing, drenched, and clinging on for dear life. Seasickness would be a constant, universal affliction. In a vessel that pitches and rolls this violently, even the most experienced mariner would spend the first few days of any voyage retching over the side, his stomach a knot of misery. And the vermin. Oh, the vermin. The ship's hold, packed tight with grain, olive oil, and wine, was a paradise for rats and mice. They would be everywhere, scurrying through the bilge, nesting in the coils of rope, contaminating the food supplies. At night, the sailors would try to sleep on the hard wooden deck, huddled together for warmth under rough woolen cloaks, only to be woken by the feeling of tiny feet scurrying over them in the darkness. Cockroaches and other insects would infest the very timbers of the ship. There was no escape. This wasn't a glorious adventure, it was a floating slum, a container for transporting goods that treated its human occupants with utter indifference. The food and water situation was just as grim. Water was stored in large clay pithoi, but after a few days at sea, it would become stagnant and taste foul. The sailors' diet would consist of hard, dry biscuits, heavily salted fish, and a handful of olives. It was a monotonous, barely nutritious diet that would have to last for weeks on end. There was no fresh food, no variety. Just the same salty, gritty mouthfuls, day after day, washed down with brackish water or cheap, sour wine. So why did they do it? Why endure these horrific conditions? Because it was the engine of their entire civilization. The power and wealth of Knossos depended entirely on these miserable little ships. That fine pottery, the bronze daggers, the perfumed oils, they were worthless unless they could be traded for essentials that Crete lacked, like the tin and copper needed to make bronze in the first place. The life of a Minoan sailor was brutal and short, but it was essential. They weren't heroic adventurers, they were the Bronze Age equivalent of long-haul truck drivers, enduring dreadful conditions to keep the supply chains moving. Their misery was the invisible foundation of the Minoan Golden Age. The lack of defensive walls at Knossos wasn't a sign of peaceful confidence so much as a calculated risk. Building and manning a massive fleet was an enormous investment of resources and manpower. Perhaps they simply decided it was more efficient to project power abroad, to control the sea lanes and profit from trade, than to hide behind stone fortifications at home. It was a gamble that paid off for centuries, but it was a gamble paid for with the health, comfort, and often the lives of the men on these ships. As you step back onto the solid ground of the quay, you feel a new appreciation for the stability of the earth beneath your feet. The ship, with its promise of trade and exotic goods, now seems more like a floating prison. You watch as workers begin to unload its cargo, carrying heavy jars up the path toward the palace storerooms. These jars contain the fruits of that miserable voyage wine, oil and grain, destined for the lavish feasts of the palace elite, who would enjoy the rewards of the sea without ever having to endure its grim realities. You follow the line of workers as they carry their heavy burdens up from the harbour, away from the sharp scent of the sea and back into the complex embrace of the palace. They trudge past the public courtyards and administrative offices, heading for the great storerooms and kitchens that serve the heart of Knossos. The air grows warmer, thicker, and soon it's filled with the most tantalizing aromas. You smell bread baking in clay ovens, the rich scent of roasting meat seasoned with rosemary and thyme, and the sweet, intoxicating perfume of honey and wine being decanted into ceremonial cups. You have arrived at the kitchens of the Minoan elite, on the eve of a great feast. Here, the glamorous illusion is a feast for the senses. You can almost see the scene that will unfold later in the great hall. The rulers and high priests, dressed in their finest embroidered linens, recline on comfortable couches. Servants move silently among them, refilling goblets of deep red wine from elegant, long-spouted pitchers. The tables are laden with food. There are platters of tender roasted lamb and pork, glistening with honey glazes. There are bowls of fresh figs and pomegranates, piles of soft white cheese drizzled with golden olive oil, and delicate little cakes made with ground almonds, honey and sesame seeds. The air is filled with the sound of a lyre being plucked softly in a corner, mingling with the refined conversation of the powerful. It is a picture of abundance, of sophisticated palates, of a life lived in luxurious comfort, far removed from the hardships of the outside world. But this opulent vision is a carefully constructed fantasy, available only to a tiny fraction of the population. You step away from the bustling kitchens that prepare this feast and wander down a different corridor, one that leads to the quarters of the common workers, the artisans, the guards, the people who make the palace function. And here, the reality of the Minoan diet is a very different story. The first thing you notice is the overwhelming smell of barley. It's the foundational scent of the common person's life. It's not the pleasant smell of baking bread, but the raw, dusty smell of dry grain, the slightly sour smell of fermenting barley porridge, and the thin, watery smell of barley soup. This was the staple food, the fuel that kept the vast majority of Minoans going, day in and day out. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner would have been variations on the same theme, a thick, gritty gruel of boiled barley, perhaps with a few lentils or chickpeas thrown in for variety. Now, imagine eating this every single day. The texture would be monotonous, a thick paste that coated your mouth. The flavor would be bland, relieved only by a pinch of salt or a sprig of whatever wild herb could be gathered nearby. The grit is what would truly wear you down. The barley was ground by hand between two stones, a process that inevitably introduced fine particles of sand and stone into the flour. Every mouthful of your daily porridge would have a slight, but persistent, gritty crunch to it. Archaeologists examining the teeth of Minoan skeletons have found them worn down to flat, polished nubs, a direct result of a lifetime spent chewing this abrasive, stone-dusted food. The nobles in the great hall might have perfect teeth, but the people who served them were slowly grinding their own smiles into dust. Meat was an almost unimaginable luxury for the common person. The lamb and pork you smelled roasting was reserved exclusively for the elite or for special religious ceremonies. A typical family might taste meat only a few times a year. Their main source of protein would be legumes, lentils, beans, and the occasional handful of snails gathered after a rain. Fish, despite Crete being an island, was also surprisingly rare in the common diet, as the best catches were likely sent to the palace or used for trade. The sweet, honeyed cakes of the aristocracy were a world away. The only sweetness a commoner might regularly taste was a sun-ripened fig or a handful of grapes in season. So why this stark dietary divide? It wasn't just about wealth, it was about social control and the fundamental structure of the palace economy. The Minoan system was a palace economy, meaning that all agricultural production was controlled by the central authority at Knossos. Farmers didn't own their land, they worked it for the palace. Their entire harvest of wheat, barley, olives and wine was brought to the palace storerooms. In return, they were paid in rations, primarily barley. The elite weren't just eating better food, they were controlling the food supply itself. This system ensured a stable workforce and kept the population dependent on the palace for their very survival. The luxurious feasts in the Great Hall were not just meals, they were a political performance. They were a vivid, visceral demonstration of the ruler's power, a way of showing that they controlled the fat of the land literally. The monotonous, gritty diet of the populace was the necessary flip side of this coin, a daily reminder of their place in the hierarchy. You leave the scent of barley and grit behind, your own stomach rumbling with a strange mix of hunger and sympathy. The gap between the feasting few and the toiling many feels vast and unbridgeable. As you make your way back towards the grander parts of the palace, you hear a new sound carrying on the breezy swell of cheers and excited shouts from the great central courtyard. It's a sound of public spectacle, of entertainment. But you have a growing suspicion that, like the food, Minoan entertainment might have a beautiful surface that conceals a brutal reality, especially when you remember the images of one of their most famous and dangerous sports. Drawn by the roar of the crowd, you make your way back to the vast central courtyard you first entered. The scene, however, has been utterly transformed. The open space is now lined with spectators, packed onto wooden bleachers and crowding the windows and balconies of the palace stories that overlook the court. The air, once calm, now crackles with a frenetic, almost feverish energy. At the center of the courtyard, the packed earth has been raked smooth, creating a makeshift arena. This is the stage for the most iconic and debated of all Minoan rituals, bull leaping. The glamorous illusion is one you know well from the famous frescoes. You see it in your mind's eye. A young man, impossibly elegant and athletic, his long, dark hair flowing behind him, he confronts a massive bull, not with a weapon, but with acrobatic grace. In the most famous depiction, one figure grasps the bull's horns, preparing to vault. A second figure is captured mid-somersault, a perfect arc over the beast's back. A third has already landed, standing poised and serene behind the bull's tail. It is a ballet of courage and skill, a harmonious dance between man and beast. The athletes are depicted with slender waists and rippling muscles, their movements fluid and effortless. The bull, though powerful, seems almost a willing participant in this beautiful, stylized ceremony. It's a breathtaking vision of humanity's ability to overcome brute force with agility and finesse. But the reality unfolding before you in the dusty, sun-scorched courtyard is nothing like the clean lines of the fresco. A heavy wooden gate is thrown open at one end of the court, and a bull explodes into the arena. This is no stylized, cooperative creature. It is a massive, terrifying animal, likely a wild auroch, the fearsome ancestor of modern cattle. It is confused, enraged, and tormented, perhaps having been starved or goaded to heighten its aggression. Its eyes are wild, its nostrils flare, and a string of slobber flies from its mouth as it paws the earth, sending clouds of dust into the air. The crowd roars its approval. Then, the leapers enter. They are not the serene, godlike athletes of the paintings. They are teenagers, both boys and girls, their faces pale with a mixture of adrenaline and sheer terror. They are stripped to the waist, their bodies oiled to make them slippery, but this does little to hide their youth, their vulnerability. They wear no armor, no protection of any kind. This is not a sport. it is a trial. The first leaper, a young man, sprints towards the charging bull. The fresco's clean, three-step process: grab the horns, somersault, land is a lie. It's a physical impossibility. No human could grasp the horns of a charging bull and use them to vault. The bull's head would be snapping up and down with bone-shattering force. The reality is something far more chaotic and dangerous. The leaper must time his run perfectly, not to grab the horns, but to dive over them. The goal is to place his hands on the bull's muscular back as it dips its head to gore him, using the upward momentum of the beast's charge to push himself into a desperate, flailing somersault. You watch, your heart pounding in your chest. The young man makes his leap. For a breathtaking second, he is airborne, a frantic tumble of limbs against the blue sky, but his timing is off by a fraction of a second. He doesn't clear the bull's massive shoulders. Instead of landing on his feet, he crashes down onto the bull's thrashing hindquarters. The beast, enraged, bucks violently. The leaper is thrown high into the air, landing with a sickening, heavy thud on the packed earth 10 feet away. He doesn't move. Assistants rush in to drag his limp body from the arena while another leaper, a young woman with a look of grim determination on her face, prepares to take her turn. There is no grace here. There is only blood, dust, and the constant, imminent threat of crippling injury or death. Broken bones, punctured lungs, and fatal gorings would have been commonplace. The career of a bull leaper was brutish and, in all likelihood, very short. So why stage such a horrifying spectacle? The why is complex, a mix of religious ritual, social rite of passage, and political theatre. The bull was a potent symbol in Minoan culture, representing untamable nature, fertility, and terrifying strength. This ritual was not about defeating the bull, but about mastering it, briefly and artistically. It was a demonstration of human skill and courage in the face of overwhelming natural power. For the young participants, likely drawn from the Minoan elite, it may have been a harrowing rite of passage, a trial to prove their worthiness to join the ruling class. Surviving the bull leap would grant them immense prestige. It was a public display of their fitness to lead. For the rulers watching from their shaded balconies, it was a powerful piece of propaganda. It was a spectacle that reinforced the social order. Just as the leapers tamed the wild bull, the palace tamed the wildness of nature and brought order to the world. It was a religious event, possibly meant to reenact a mythological story, or to placate a powerful, bull-like deity. The terror and the bloodshed were not unfortunate byproducts. They were essential to the ritual's power. The risk, the potential for sacrifice, is what made the act sacred. The clean, graceful frescoes were the sanitized, idealized version of the event, the official story they told themselves and the world. It was a beautiful lie to cover a terrifying, bloody truth. The peaceful, nature-loving image of the Minoans is hard to reconcile with a ritual that so deliberately flirted with death, a ritual whose vibrant memory was painted directly onto the walls of the palace itself. You turn away from the brutal spectacle in the courtyard, the cheers of the crowd still echoing behind you. You need to escape the dust and the visceral memory of the failed leap. You retreat back into the cool, dim interior of the palace, seeking the quiet of the less trafficked chambers. As you wander, your hand brushes against the wall, the surface cool and surprisingly smooth. You are surrounded by the art that has made this civilization legendary. The frescoes. Everywhere you look, the walls are alive with color. Here, in a quiet hall, is the famous bluebird fresco. A charming, impossibly blue bird perches on a wild rose bush, surrounded by rocks and lilies painted with a free-flowing, impressionistic style. In another room, you find playful monkeys climbing on stylized rocks, their movements captured with a lively energy. On a larger wall, a procession of men and women moves in solemn dignity, carrying ceremonial vessels. This is the glamorous illusion of Minoan art, a world of peace, vibrant color, and a deep, harmonious connection with nature. The artists who created these scenes seem to have been lovers of life, capturing its beauty with a light, joyful touch. The paintings feel modern, almost impressionistic, a breath of fresh air compared to the rigid, formal art of Egypt or Mesopotamia. They are the ultimate expression of the Minoan Golden Age, a society seemingly at peace with itself and its environment. But you lean closer to the wall, examining the plaster itself. You run your finger over a small crack near the floor. The illusion of effortless beauty is just that, an illusion. The reality of creating these masterpieces was a grueling, physically demanding, and profoundly stinky process. The very foundation of a fresco is lime plaster, and to make it, the Minoans had to burn massive quantities of limestone in kilns. This process released thick, choking clouds of carbon dioxide and other noxious fumes. The area around the kilns would have been a hazy, lung-searing wasteland, smelling of acrid smoke and superheated rock. Once the limestone was converted to quicklime, it had to be slaked by adding water. This was a dangerous chemical reaction that produced a tremendous amount of heat, causing the water to boil violently and spit caustic, flesh-burning steam. The workers who tended the slaking pits would have their hands and faces constantly raw and chapped from the alkaline plaster, their eyes stinging from the fumes. After slaking, the lime putty had to be aged, often for months or even years, in deep pits. When uncovered, these pits would release a powerful, sour, and deeply unpleasant stench, the smell of wet, decaying limestone that would cling to the workers' clothes and hair for days. When the aged plaster was finally ready, it was applied to the palace walls in several layers. The final, smooth layer, the one the artist would paint on, had to be applied while the underlayers were still wet. This meant the artists had to work quickly, against a constantly ticking clock, before the plaster dried. This technique, called bon fresco or true fresco, is what gives the paintings their famous durability, as the pigments bind chemically with the plaster as it cures. But imagine the pressure. An artist would have a small section of wall plastered, and then they would have only a few hours to complete that part of the painting before the plaster set. A single mistake could mean having to chip the entire section off the wall and start again. And the paint itself was not the clean, premixed liquid we know today. The pigments were ground by hand from minerals and earth soakers for reds and yellows, carbon black from soot, green from malachite, and the famous Egyptian blue from a complex process of firing silica, lime, and copper. The grinding was dusty, tedious work. Worse still, some of the most vibrant pigments were highly toxic. Orpiment and relga, minerals used to create brilliant yellows and oranges, were compounds of arsenic. The artists who ground these pigments and mixed them into a paste would be inhaling and absorbing this poison on a daily basis. Like the priestess with her lead makeup, the artists were slowly poisoning themselves for their art, trading their long-term health for the brilliance of their colors. So why endure this stinking, toxic, high-pressure process? Because the fresco was more than just decoration. It was a medium of power. The ability to cover vast walls with vibrant, permanent images was a statement of wealth and technological prowess. The scenes depicted were not random choices, they were carefully selected propaganda. The peaceful nature scenes reinforced the idea of the palace as a center of cosmic harmony, a place where humanity lived in balance with the natural world, a useful myth for a society whose wealth was based on agriculture. The processions of tribute bearers reinforced the political and economic dominance of Knossos. The art wasn't just beautiful, it was functional. It was designed to awe visitors, to instruct the illiterate, and to constantly reiterate the core messages of Minoan power. The foul smell of the plaster, the artist's frantic race against time, the slow poisoning from the pigments, all these harsh realities were hidden behind the serene and beautiful surface of the final image. The piece depicted in the frescoes was a carefully manufactured lie, built on a foundation of industrial grime and a complete disregard for the health of the artisans who created it. It was another beautiful mask, hiding the messy, human reality underneath. You leave the room of the Blue Bird, the memory of toxic pigments and sour plaster still lingering in your mind. You continue your drift through the palace, moving now towards the outer edges of the complex. As you walk, something strikes you as deeply odd, something you noticed when you first arrived but didn't fully process. There are no walls. No great, cyclopean fortifications like those at Mycenae or Tiryns on the Greek mainland. No defensive towers, no fortified gates, no moats. The Palace of Knossos, the heart of an entire civilization, lies completely open, sprawling into the surrounding landscape with a kind of serene confidence. This is the glamorous illusion of the Pax Minoica, the Minoan peace. The traditional historical narrative paints a picture of a uniquely peaceful Bronze Age society. Secure on their island of Crete, protected by their unrivaled navy, the Minoans had no need for land-based defenses. They were traders, not warriors, artists, not conquerors. Their civilization flourished for centuries in an atmosphere of tranquility, their open palaces a testament to a society that had transcended the petty violence and constant warfare that characterized their mainland contemporaries. The lack of walls is presented as the ultimate proof of their enlightened, peaceful nature. It's a beautiful idea, powerful, sophisticated culture that simply had no enemies to fear. But you find a quiet, dusty corner of the palace, a storeroom perhaps, and you let your mind drift deeper, past the official story, to the darker discoveries that archaeologists have tried to downplay or explain away for decades. The shocking reality that undermines the entire concept of the Pax Minoica is the chilling and undeniable evidence of human sacrifice. At Animaspilia, a temple site on a slope of Mount Juctas, a place that overlooks Knossos, archaeologists uncovered a shocking scene, frozen in time by the collapse of the building in an earthquake. Inside, they found the remains of 4 people. One was a priestess, crushed by the falling roof. Another, a priest, lay nearby, but on a raised platform, an altar, lay the skeleton of a young man, about 18 years old. He was lying on his side in a trussed, contracted position, as if his feet had been tied to his thighs. Most disturbingly, lying amongst his bones was a magnificent bronze dagger with intricate carvings. The position of the dagger and the specific way the bones were found strongly suggest that the young man had been killed in a ritual sacrifice, just moments before the earthquake destroyed the temple. One of his leg bones was found in 2 pieces, indicating he had been trussed up like an animal for slaughter. The priest found near him seems to have been caught in the act. This was not an isolated incident. At a sanctuary in the town of Fornu Corifai, the remains of a young child were found, the skull apparently smashed in a ritual context. And in a building in the city of Knossos itself, known as the North House, archaeologists found the bones of at least 4 children, dated to the period just before the final destruction of the palace. The bones bore fine, sharp cut marks, identical to the marks left on animal bones when they are stripped of their flesh for consumption. The conclusion, however horrifying, is difficult to escape. These children were not just sacrificed, they were butchered, and likely cannibalized, in a desperate religious ritual. So why? Why would a supposedly peaceful, artistic, nature-loving society engage in such brutal practices? The why shatters the illusion of serene confidence and reveals a deep-seated terror. These were not acts of casual cruelty. They were the last, desperate resorts of a people facing overwhelming disaster. The sacrifice at the Animaspilia temple seems to have been a frantic attempt to appease a god and ward off the very earthquake that ultimately destroyed the site. The cannibalism at Knossos appears to have taken place during the final, chaotic days of the palace, perhaps as a terrifying ritual to restore a cosmic order that was collapsing around them, or to absorb the life force of the young in a time of starvation and invasion. The Minoan worldview was not one of peaceful bliss. It was one that sought to maintain a fragile balance with powerful, unpredictable, and often terrifying natural forces, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, droughts. Their religion was an attempt to manage this relationship. Most of the time, this could be done with offerings of grain, wine, and animal sacrifice. But in moments of extreme crisis, when the gods seemed truly enraged, extreme offerings were required. Human life, particularly the life of a pure, unblemished youth, was the most potent offering one could make. The lack of walls at Knossos, then, takes on a new, more sinister meaning. It was not a sign of peace, but perhaps a sign of a different kind of security, an arrogant belief that their control over the supernatural world, through their rituals, was all the protection they needed. Their true defense was not stone, but blood. They didn't build walls because they believed their rituals, their connection to the divine connection that could extend to human sacrifice in dire times, made them untouchable. It was a terrifying form of hubris, a belief that they could placate the forces of nature that would ultimately, despite their bloody offerings, bring their civilization to its knees. The open palace was not a symbol of peace, but of a precarious and ultimately fatal overconfidence in their ability to manage the unseen world, a world they tried to control with everything from advanced plumbing to, when all else failed, a ritual dagger. You shake off the chilling thoughts of sacrifice, turning your attention back to the more tangible aspects of the palace. You think about that concept of managing the world, of imposing order on nature. The Minoans' greatest and most famous attempt at this was not in the realm of the supernatural, but in the intensely practical world of plumbing. You leave the outer parts of the palace and descend once more into its complex core, seeking out the evidence of this celebrated technological achievement. You find yourself in what is known as the Queen's Megaron, a beautifully appointed suite of rooms believed to have been the private quarters of a high-ranking woman, perhaps the Queen herself. The walls are adorned with the famous dolphin fresco, and a light well allows a soft, dappled sunlight to filter down. And there, in a small adjoining room, is the pinnacle of Minoan engineering, a feature that has astonished historians for over a century, a flush toilet. This is the glamorous illusion of Minoan sanitation. It is a marvel to behold. There is a seat, likely once a comfortable wooden construction, positioned over a channel in the floor. Beside it are remnants of what was clearly a system for pouring water from a large jug, or perhaps even a cistern on the floor above it to wash the waste away. The channel disappears into the wall, connecting to an intricate, underground system of terracotta pipes. These clay pipes are masterpieces of design, tapered at one end so they could fit snugly together, forming a continuous, leak-resistant conduit. This system, powered by rainwater or runoff from the hillside, carried the palace's effluent away, down the slope and into the nearby river. It seems impossibly modern, a testament to a society that valued hygiene, comfort, and clever engineering. You can imagine the Queen, enjoying a level of clean, odorless convenience that would not be seen again in Europe for nearly 3,000 years. It's the ultimate symbol of Minoan sophistication. But as you stand in the small, stone-lined room, you close your eyes and imagine the reality. And the reality, you quickly realize, stank. The system was ingenious for its time, but it was still a primitive, gravity-fed network with no bends or traps, simple, shaped curve of pipe that sits under every modern sink and toilet. That curve holds a plug of water that prevents sewer gas from rising back up into the room. The Minoan system had no such feature. This meant that a constant, noxious draft of air from the main sewer line would have vented directly back up through the toilet channel and into the Queen's private chambers. The smell of the collective waste of the entire palace wing would have been a permanent resident in this beautifully decorated room. The only way to combat it would have been to constantly burn incense or scatter fragrant herbs and petals on the floor, creating a cloying, perfumed soup of smells that did more to mask the problem than to solve it. Then, there were the clogs. The terracotta pipes, for all their clever design, were narrow and had rough, uneven joints. They were not designed to handle solid waste of any significant quantity, let alone the Bronze Age equivalent of toilet paper, which was likely a sponge on a stick, or perhaps smooth stones or ceramic shards. Clogs would have been a constant, recurring nightmare. Imagine the scene. The Queen's toilet backs up. The channel overflows, spilling raw sewage onto the floor of her apartment. Now, a team of palace workers must be summoned. They have no modern plumbing snakes or chemical drain cleaners. Their only option is to start digging. They would have to locate the section of buried pipe, smash through the plaster floor of the palace, and excavate the earth to reach the terracotta conduit. Then, they would have to break open the clogged section, spilling its foul contents into the workspace, and manually, with their bare hands, clear the blockage. The repair would be just as messy. They would have to fashion a new section of pipe, fit it into place, and try to seal the joints with clay, a seal that would almost certainly leak. Then they would have to refill the hole, replaster the floor, and try to scrub the stench of sewage from the room, an almost impossible task. This entire, disgusting process would likely take days, and would have been a frequent occurrence throughout the palace. The advanced plumbing system, for all its brilliance, was a high-maintenance, fragile, and profoundly smelly reality. The why behind this flawed marvel is a classic case of Minoan ambition outstripping their technical capabilities. They understood the basic principles of hydraulics and the power of gravity. They had the organizational skill to manufacture and lay hundreds of meters of pipe. What they wanted was to impose order on human waste, to channel it away and create a clean, modern-seeming palace. It was an extension of the same impulse that led them to create orderly frescoes and symmetrical courtyards. They were obsessed with control. However, they lacked the crucial, subtle components like the U-bend that would have made the system truly functional and hygienic. They had solved the big problem getting waste out of the room, but had not yet conceived of the smaller, more insidious problem of sewer gas and reliable flow. Their sophisticated system, therefore, was a double-edged sword. It was a huge improvement over a simple chamber pot, but it also introduced a new set of problems: pervasive smells, catastrophic blockages, and the constant, messy labor required to keep it all working. It was a symbol not of effortless perfection, but of a gritty, hands-on, and often disgusting struggle to maintain order in a world that constantly threatened to descend into chaos and filth, a struggle that extended from their bodies to their very clothes. You move away from the sight of the ancient, fragrant toilet, the phantom smell of sewer gas and incense still tickling your nose. Your journey takes you now towards the grander residential quarters, rooms where the elite of Knossos would have dressed, slept, and conducted their private lives. Here, the walls are covered in frescoes depicting elegantly attired figures, providing a vivid window into Minoan fashion. You see them everywhere. The men in their distinctive kilts or loincloths, cinched tightly at the waist with elaborate belts, their chests bare and their arms adorned with bracelets. The women are even more striking, dressed in magnificent flounced skirts made of layered, brightly coloured fabric, with tight-fitting bodices that leave their breasts completely exposed. This is the glamorous illusion of Minoan courtly fashion. It is a vision of bold, confident, and sensual elegance. The clothes seem light, airy, and perfectly suited to the warm Cretan climate. The fabrics are depicted with intricate woven patterns and embroidered details, suggesting a highly sophisticated textile industry. The jewelry, golden necklaces, intricate hairpins, beaded anklets, and a notable fondness for finely crafted seal stones on their wrists speaks of immense wealth and a refined aesthetic. The bare-breasted style of the women, in particular, has fascinated the modern world, suggesting a society with a refreshingly open and natural attitude towards the human body, a world away from the restrictive and concealing fashions of other ancient cultures. They appear clean, proud, and stunningly beautiful. But as you imagine yourself wearing these fine garments, the beautiful illusion quickly begins to unravel, replaced by an itchy, greasy, and profoundly uncomfortable reality. Let's start with the layer no fresco ever depicts: the undergarments, or rather, the lack thereof. While the outer garments were works of art, the concept of daily wear, washable underwear, did not exist. The rough, sweat-soaked wool or linen of their kilts and skirts was worn directly against the skin. This meant the grand, elaborate outer garments were rarely, if ever, properly washed. To do so would risk ruining the delicate dyes and embroidered patterns. Instead, they would be aired out, brushed, and perfumed to mask the growing accumulation of sweat, body oils, and grime. Your beautiful, flounced skirt would, after a few weeks of wear, carry a distinct and unpleasant personal aroma. And then, there were the pests. This warm, unwashed, and constantly worn clothing was the perfect breeding ground for lice and fleas. These tiny tormentors would have been a constant fact of life for everyone, from the lowest servant to the queen herself. Imagine trying to maintain a look of serene dignity while your scalp and body are crawling with biting, itching insects. The intricately coiled hairstyles, held in place with pins and pomades, would have been veritable louse nurseries. Archaeologists have found fine-toothed combs made of ivory and bone, the Minoan equivalent of a knit comb, which speaks to a constant and, largely losing, battle against these parasites. The elegant gesture of a noblewoman raising a hand to her hair might not have been a coy flirtation, but a desperate attempt to relieve a sudden, maddening itch. The fabrics themselves were not as comfortable as they appear in the art. While linen could be woven into a fine, soft cloth, the more common material was wool. Minoan sheep were shorn with bronze shears, and the wool was spun by hand. The resulting thread would be far coarser and itchier than modern, machine-processed wool. Wearing a tight-fitting woolen bodice directly against your skin on a hot Cretan day would be a recipe for constant chafing and heat rash. The bare-breasted style for women, while visually striking, may have had a practical element. It was simply too hot and uncomfortable to encase the entire torso in scratchy, heavy wool. So why endure this state of constant, low-level discomfort and infestation? The why lies in the social function of clothing. Fashion for the Minoans was not primarily about comfort, it was about broadcasting status. The complexity of your kilt's weave, the number of flounces on your skirt, the brilliance of your garment's dye, these were all visual cues that instantly communicated your rank in the rigid palace hierarchy. A common worker wore a simple, undied loincloth. A member of the elite wore a vibrant, multi-layered costume that was impractical for any form of manual labor. Your clothes were your resume, your social security number, and your passport, all woven into one. The exposed breasts of the women likely had a specific religious and social significance that we can only guess at. Perhaps it was a mark of fertility, a sign of a priestess, or the traditional attire of the ruling class, meant to distinguish them from commoners and foreigners. Whatever the reason, it was a uniform, not an expression of personal freedom. The discomfort of itchy wool and the torment of lice were simply the price one paid to maintain one's place in the social order. The perfumes and oils used to mask the body odor weren't just for pleasure, they were a necessary tool to make close social interaction bearable. The entire elegant charade was a performance, a way of maintaining an illusion of effortless grace while your body was quietly crying out for a good wash and a thorough deluzzing. The same devotion to symbolism over practicality could be seen in the tools they held, where even the most sacred object had a messy, functional alter ego. Leaving the itchy, imaginary garments of the elite behind, you find yourself drawn toward a more austere and imposing part of the palace. This is a place of ritual and power, the kind of room where the great symbols of the state would have been displayed. The air feels heavier here, charged with a sense of reverence. Your eyes are drawn to a stand in the center of the room, where a large, iconic object is mounted, the lobreeze, or sacred double axe. The glamorous illusion of the double axe is one of pure, divine power. You see it everywhere in Minoan art and architecture. It is carved into the stone pillars of the palace, painted on pottery, and engraved on seals. The axe heads themselves, cast in bronze or fashioned from gold and other precious materials for votive purposes, are objects of stark, symmetrical beauty. The two opposed, curving blades create a shape that is both elegant and menacing. This was no common wood-chopping tool. It was the paramount symbol of Minoan religion and authority, perhaps representing a primary goddess or the power of the king-priest. You can imagine it being carried in solemn processions, held aloft by a high priest, its polished bronze surface gleaming in the torchlight. It represents lightning, the power of the earth, the authority of the palace, clean, abstract symbol of absolute control. The word labyrinth itself may even be derived from labris, meaning house of the double axe. But as you examine the symbol, you must force yourself to remember its humble and brutally messy origins. The shocking reality is that the sacred labris was also a highly practical and very bloody butcher's tool. While small, votive axes were made of gold, the large, functional bronze axes seen in ritual contexts had a grimly practical purpose: the slaughter of sacrificial animals, most notably bulls. Now, picture the scene not in this quiet, reverent chamber, but back in the central courtyard, moments after a bull-leaping spectacle or during a separate, more solemn religious festival. A massive bull is dragged forward, secured by thick ropes. This is not the clean, symbolic death you might imagine. Killing a 1-ton animal with an axe is a horrific, violent, and messy business. The priest, or a designated functionary, would have to swing the heavy bronze axe with all his might, aiming for the spot between the bull's eyes, or the back of its neck. It would likely take several powerful, thudding blows to bring the animal down. The first strike would produce a sickening crunch of bone and a fountain of hot, coppery-smelling blood that would spray across the priest, the altar, and the pristine flagstones of the courtyard. The dying animal would thrash and bellow, its powerful legs kicking convulsively, spattering more blood and filth everywhere. After the bull was finally dead, the real work for the double axe began. It was the perfect tool for dismembering the massive carcass. The heavy, balanced head was ideal for smashing through thick bones and severing major joints. The two blades meant the user could work for longer without pausing to sharpen the edge. When one side became dull and chipped from hitting bone, he could simply flip it over and use the other. You can imagine the scene: priests and their assistants, their arms slick with blood and gore up to the elbows, hacking apart the carcass. They would chop off the legs, split the ribcage, and divide the meat into portions, some to be burned as an offering to the gods, some to be cooked for the feast of the elite you imagined earlier. The sacred symbol of divine order was, in practice, an abattoir tool, covered in blood, hair, and fat. The beautiful, symmetrical object of worship was also the instrument of a visceral, stinking, and incredibly gory process. So why would the Minoans elevate a butcher's tool to the status of their highest religious symbol? The why gets to the very heart of their worldview. For the Minoans, there was no clean separation between the sacred and the profane, the spiritual and the practical. The act of sacrifice was the ultimate religious ritual. It was the moment of communion between the human and divine worlds. The tool used to perform this critical, transformative act, the messy, bloody, visceral act of taking a life to give it to the gods, naturally became imbued with immense sacred power. The butchery was not seen as a dirty job to be hidden away. It was the central point of the ceremony. The power of the god was made manifest in the death of the bull, and the labris was the conduit for that power. Its practicality was its divinity. Unlike a Christian cross, which is a purely abstract symbol of a past event, the labris was a tool that was still very much in use. Its sacredness was renewed every time it was slicked with blood. The choice of a double axe over a sword or spear is also telling. A sword is a weapon of war, for killing men. The axe was a tool for managing the animal world, for transforming a powerful, living beast into sustenance for gods and humans. It perfectly encapsulated the Minoan focus on controlling the natural world, rather than conquering other nations. The symbol wasn't just an image of power, it was the very instrument through which that power was practically applied, in all its gory detail. The blood and the butchery were not an unfortunate reality to be hidden, they were the entire point. This raw, physical reality was the foundation of their spiritual beliefs, just as their entire economy was built not on grand ideas, but on the meticulous and ultimately boring act of counting every last drop of oil and grain. You step away from the imaginary blood and gore of the sacrificial court, leaving the sacred double axe behind. Your path takes you deeper into the administrative heart of the palace, into a series of small, windowless rooms that feel more like offices than royal chambers. The air here is dry and dusty, smelling of old clay and stillness. Piled on low shelves and stored in wooden chests are hundreds of small, flat, unassuming clay tablets. They are rectangular, about the size of a modern smartphone and covered in rows of tiny, precise markings. This is it. This is the great enigma of the Minoan world, the script known as Linear A. The glamorous illusion surrounding Linear A is one of profound, lost secrets. Ear, etched into humble clay, is the authentic, unfiltered voice of the Minoans themselves. Because no one has ever managed to decipher it, the script has become a blank screen onto which we can project our most romantic fantasies. What secrets do these tablets hold? Are they epic poems, rivaling Homer, telling the true story of the Minotaur? Are they hymns to the serpent goddess, revealing the innermost secrets of a mysterious matriarchal religion? Perhaps they contain the collected wisdom of Minoan philosophy, or the chronicles of their sea kings, detailing voyages to forgotten lands. The undeciphered script represents a locked treasure chest of knowledge. The person who finally cracks the code will unleash a torrent of priceless information, rewriting history and giving voice to a civilization that has been silent for over 3 millennia. The potential is intoxicating. But you pick up one of the tablets. It feels cool and heavy in your hand. You run your thumb over the incisions, and you prepare yourself for the almost certain, crushingly mundane reality. While we cannot read Linear A, we have successfully deciphered its successor script, Linear B, which was used by the Mycenaean Greeks, who later occupied Knossos. Linear B uses many of the same symbols as Linear A to write an early form of Greek. And what profound secrets did the Linear B tablets reveal? Epic poems, religious mysteries, not a chance. They were, almost without exception, meticulous and mind-numbingly boring accounting ledgers. The shocking reality is that the vast majority of the Linear A tablets you are holding are almost certainly records of palace inventory. This tablet here. To the palace storeroom, 27 jars of olive oil. The one next to it. From the Weavers' Guild, 12 bolts of linen, 3 bolts of wool dyed. The one over there. Personal record, 5 female workers, 2 male workers, 7 children receiving half rations of barley. The great, lost voice of the Minoans probably speaks not of heroes and gods, but of tax receipts, shipping manifests, and lists of livestock. The script wasn't developed for poetry. It was developed for bureaucracy. It was a tool for the army of scribes and accountants who managed the vast palace economy. Their job was to track every single amphora of wine, every bushel of wheat, every head of cattle that came into or went out of the palace's control. Imagine the life of the scribe who wrote the tablet you're holding. He wasn't a poet or a priest. He was a Bronze Age accountant. He spent his days sitting cross-legged in a stuffy, windowless room like this one, with a lump of wet clay and a sharp stylus. A foreman from the storerooms would call out numbers, and he would painstakingly press the symbols into the clay. 5 goats for the festival. Press. 30 kilos of figs from the southern farms. Press. It was tedious, repetitive, essential work. These tablets were not meant to be permanent records. They were temporary notes. Once the accounts were balanced or the information was transferred to a more permanent, and now lost, medium like papyrus or parchment, the clay tablet would simply be wiped clean and reused. The only reason we have these tablets at all is because they were accidentally baked and preserved when the palace burned down. We are reading the ancient equivalent of their recycled scrap paper. So why develop a sophisticated writing system just for bean counting? The why is the same reason you've seen again and again. Control. A civilization as complex as the Minoan one, with a centralized palace economy controlling the agricultural output of the entire region, simply could not function without meticulous record-keeping. You cannot manage thousands of workers, store tons of grain, and equip trading vessels without writing. The script was the single most important piece of administrative technology they possessed. It was more critical to their power than the double axe or the bull leapers. It was the operating system of the entire Minoan enterprise. The illusion of lost epics is a modern projection, born from our desire for history to be exciting and narrative-driven. The Minoans themselves likely saw their script as a profoundly practical tool. The true secret that Linear A holds is not a story, but the revelation of a society utterly obsessed with administration, with counting and controlling every aspect of its existence. The romance is a fantasy, The reality is a spreadsheet. This obsession with control wasn't just limited to goods and people. It extended to the very land they lived on, a beautiful and sun-drenched island that looks like a paradise, but which demanded back-breaking labor to make it productive. You place the clay tablet back on its dusty shelf, the silent testament to a world of bureaucratic minutiae. Leaving the stuffy confines of the administrative wing, you yearn for fresh air and open space. You find a high balcony on the western side of the palace, one that looks away from the sea and towards the island's interior. The view is breathtaking. Below you, the gentle slopes are a patchwork of silver-green olive groves, lush vineyards and fields of golden grain, all basking in the warm, honeyed light of the late afternoon sun. In the distance, rugged mountains rise up, their peaks hazy in the heat. The air smells of wild herbs, sun-baked earth and blooming citrus trees. This is the glamorous illusion of Crete, the island paradise. It is the vision that has drawn people to its shores for millennia. A land of natural abundance, blessed with a perfect climate, where life is easy and the earth provides its bounty with minimal effort. You can almost picture the Minoan farmer, a contented figure strolling through his olive grove, plucking ripe fruit from the trees as songbirds chirp in the branches. It's an image of rustic, sun-drenched simplicity, the perfect pastoral backdrop for the sophisticated civilization that called this island home. The land itself seems to radiate a kind of peaceful, effortless prosperity. But you look closer, your eyes tracing the contours of the hills. You notice that the gentle slopes are not as natural as they first appeared. They are carved into a series of long, horizontal steps, and with that observation, the shocking reality of Minoan agriculture comes into focus. This paradise was not a gift from nature. It was painstakingly and laboriously manufactured. The beautiful landscape is a testament, not to ease, but to generations of back-breaking toil. The island of Crete is, for the most part, mountainous and rocky. Good, flat, arable land is scarce. To create the fields you see before you, the Minoans had to engage in the exhausting practice of terrace farming. Imagine the work. A farmer and his family, armed with nothing more than bronze picks, wooden shovels and woven baskets, would have to carve a level strip out of a rocky hillside. They would break up the stone, haul away the rubble, and then build a retaining wall, stone by stone, to hold the precious soil in place. Then, they would have to find that soil, carrying it in baskets up from the valleys or riverbeds to fill the newly created terrace. It was a monumental undertaking, repeated endlessly to create every single one of those natural-looking fields. And the work never stopped. The stone walls had to be constantly maintained, as winter rains would cause them to collapse. The soil, thin and fragile, was always at risk of eroding away. And then, there was the harvest. The image of the contented farmer plucking olives is a gentle fiction. Harvesting olives is brutal work. The trees are thorny, and the branches are tough. The farmers would beat the branches with long sticks to knock the olives loose, which would then have to be gathered from the ground one by one. The most intensive part of the harvest was the pressing. The olives would be crushed under a massive stone wheel, often pushed by human or animal power in an endless, dizzying circle. The resulting paste was then squeezed in heavy presses to extract the oil. It was a greasy, physically demanding process that stained the skin and exhausted the body. The grape harvest was no easier. The vines required constant pruning. At harvest time, the heavy bunches had to be cut by hand and carried in baskets to the treading floor. There, men and women would spend hours stomping on the grapes with their bare feet, their legs and clothes stained purple with the juice, the air thick with the smell of fermenting fruit and the buzz of wasps and flies. This wasn't a joyful festival. It was grueling, sticky, repetitive labor, all performed under the relentless heat of the Mediterranean sun. So why did they pour so much effort into reshaping the very island itself? The why is simple: survival, which then fed the engine of the palace economy. They had no choice. To feed the growing population of Knossos and the surrounding towns, they had to make every square metre of usable land productive. The terrace walls were not just an agricultural technique, they were a lifeline. Without them, the island could not have sustained the civilization that grew upon it. The olive oil and wine produced by this back-breaking labour were more than just food. They were the primary commodities of the Minoan trade network. The oil that filled the jars in the palace storerooms, the oil that was traded for copper and tin from overseas, was produced by the sweat and exhaustion of thousands of anonymous farmers working on these artificial hillsides. The idyllic landscape is a lie. It is a man-made factory for producing agricultural goods, a factory built of stone and soil and maintained by human muscle. The peaceful Cretan countryside was a place of relentless, year-round labour. The beauty of the olive groves is inseparable from the aching backs of the people who built the terraces and beat the branches. The serenity of the pastoral view is an illusion that conceals a reality of calloused hands, sunburnt skin, and the endless, grinding work that was the true foundation of Minoan wealth. It was a world where even youthful sport was not a game, but another form of brutal, physical trial. From your vantage point overlooking the cultivated, man-made landscape, you turn your gaze back toward the palace complex. Your mind is still on the physical demands of Minoan life, the sheer strength and endurance required not just for labour, but for ritual. You recall another famous piece of Minoan art, one that at first glance seems to celebrate a more conventional form of athletic prowess, the Boxing Princes or Boxing Children fresco from a Cratere, a Minoan settlement on the island of Thera. The glamorous illusion of this fresco is one of youthful, sporting competition. It depicts two boys, their heads partially shaved with long, flowing locks remaining, a common hairstyle for Minoan youths. They are squared off against each other in a classic boxing stance. One boy wears a belt and a loincloth, while the other wears only a belt. Crucially, they are both wearing a single boxing glove, on their right hand only. The scene feels playful, almost like a depiction of a friendly sparring match, a rite of passage for aristocratic boys learning the arts of combat and physical fitness. Their bodies are lean and athletic, their postures confident. It seems to be a celebration of sportsmanship, of the kind of healthy, character-building competition we might see in a modern gym or schoolyard. It reinforces the image of a sophisticated society that valued physical education and the aesthetics of the athletic human form. But you lean into this mental image, focusing on the details, and the charming illusion of a friendly sport dissolves into a much more brutal and disfiguring reality. The single glove is the first clue. This wasn't for protection in the modern sense. Ancient Greek boxing, a tradition likely inherited from the Minoans, was not about scoring points or winning by a technical knockout. The goal was not to outbox your opponent, but to batter him into submission. The gloved hand was the weapon. The ungloved hand was for blocking and parrying. The fight would continue until one combatant was unable to continue or quit. Now look closer at the glove itself. It's not a padded mitt designed to soften the blow. It's more like a hard leather strap, a cestus, wrapped tightly around the knuckles and wrist. In later Greek and Roman times, these would be studded with metal, but even the plain leather Minoan version was designed to inflict maximum damage, not to protect the puncher's hand. It turned the fist into a hardened club. A blow from this weapon would not just bruise, it would split skin, break teeth, and crush cartilage. The fact that they are boys makes it even more disturbing. This isn't a playful spar. It's a depiction of children engaged in a violent and dangerous activity. The true, shocking reality of this sport was its focus on the head. Blows to the body were secondary. The primary target was the face. The goal was disfigurement. A successful boxer was one who could systematically dismantle his opponent's face, breaking his nose, shattering his cheekbones, closing his eyes with massive swelling. The cauliflower ear, the flattened nose, the scar tissue around the eyes, these were not unfortunate side effects of the sport. They were its trophies. They were the badges of honor that a boxer carried with him for the rest of his life, a permanent testament to his toughness and his victories. The fight would often end only when one of the boys was a bloody, swollen mess, barely recognizable. The playful scene in the fresco is just a stylized snapshot before the real violence begins. So why would they encourage their children, especially the sons of the elite, to engage in such a brutal and disfiguring practice? The why is rooted in a cultural obsession with toughness and the public demonstration of pain tolerance. In a society where life was physically demanding, whether you were a farmer, a sailor, or a bull leaper, the ability to endure and inflict pain was a highly valued masculine trait. This boxing was not a sport in our sense. It was a form of ritualized combat, a training ground for warriors, and a public spectacle of hardness. For the aristocratic youths depicted, it was part of their education. It was meant to beat the softness out of them, to prepare them for a life of leadership by proving they could withstand extreme physical punishment without complaint. A broken nose or a scarred eye was a mark of honor, proof that you had been tested and had not been found wanting. It was a physical parallel to the psychological trials of the priesthood, or the life or death gamble of the bull leapers. It was all part of the same system of creating an elite class that was visibly, physically, and mentally harder than the general populace. The beautiful, athletic ideal of the fresco is a lie that conceals a culture that celebrated violence and saw facial disfigurement as a desirable outcome. It was about forging a certain kind of person, one who could embody the dangerous power that the Minoans worshipped, a power symbolized not just by the bull, but by another creature often found in the palace, the serpent. You turn from the imagined brutality of the boxing match, seeking a quieter, more contemplative symbol of Minoan belief. You find yourself in a reconstruction of a household shrine, a small, intimate space where the family would have made their daily offerings. In the center of the shrine stands the single most iconic artifact of the entire Minoan civilization, the serpent goddess figurine. She is small, only about a foot high, but she radiates an immense power. This is the glamorous illusion of the chthonic goddess. She stands proud and imperious, her arms outstretched, holding a writhing snake in each hand. A third snake coils around her waist and up her back. She wears the signature Minoan courtly dress, the flounced skirt and the tight bodice that exposes her breasts. But on her head sits not a delicate hairpin, but a small leopard, or cat, perched there like a crown. She is the mistress of animals, the embodiment of wild, untamable nature, of fertility, and of the mysterious power of the underworld. Her wide, staring eyes seem to hold ancient secrets. She is a potent, terrifying, and mesmerizing image of female divinity, a goddess who draws her power from the earth and the venomous creatures that live within it. She represents the very soul of Minoan religion. But as you gaze at this powerful icon, you must consider a far more mundane and practical reality that existed alongside this spiritual reverence. The snake, to the Minoans, was not just a symbol of divine power. It was also a highly effective and very necessary form of pest control. The shocking, slithering reality is that the palace of Knossos, for all its grandeur, would have been absolutely crawling with vermin. Remember the great storerooms you imagined earlier, the ones filled with mountains of grain, barley, dried figs, and jars of olive oil? These were a paradise for rats and mice. An infestation of rodents could be catastrophic, capable of devouring a significant portion of the palace's food supply, the very foundation of its wealth and power. They would contaminate grain with their droppings, gnaw through storage containers, and spread disease. The Minoans had no cats as we know them. The small feline on the goddess's head is a point of debate, possibly a wildcat, but domestic cats were not common. Their primary weapon in the endless war against rodents was the snake. Imagine the palace not just as a center of religion, but as a giant, functioning ecosystem. The Minoans would have actively encouraged certain species of non-venomous snakes like the European cat snake or the leopard snake to live within the palace walls. They would have been the palace's official, slithering exterminators. You would see them constantly, a long, dark shape disappearing into a crack in the storeroom wall, a rustle in the rafters overhead as a snake corners a mouse, or even a shed snakeskin lying in a dusty corner of a royal apartment. They would have been a common and welcome sight. The servants would know not to harm them, to leave out bowls of water for them, to treat them as valuable members of the palace's workforce. This creates a strange and slightly creepy domestic reality. A young scribe, working late in a stuffy records room, might look up to see a 4-foot snake silently gliding along a high shelf, its forked tongue tasting the air. A kitchen worker, reaching for a bag of flour, might feel a smooth, cool body brush against their hand as a resident serpent finishes its meal. The relationship with these creatures was deeply ambivalent. On one hand, they were respected, even revered, as symbols of the goddess. On the other hand, they were a familiar and slightly unnerving part of the daily furniture, the slithering janitors of the palace. The why behind the serpent goddess figurine, then, is a beautiful fusion of the mystical and the mundane. The Minoans, practical as ever, saw the divine in the useful. The snake was a perfect symbol because it embodied this duality. It was a mysterious creature that emerged from holes in the ground, seemingly connected to the underworld and the earth's regenerative power. It shed its skin, a potent symbol of rebirth and immortality. Its silent, deadly efficiency as a hunter was awe-inspiring. It was truly another creature. At the same time, this divine power had a direct, practical application. It protected their food. By deifying the snake, they were sanctifying their pest control. The serpent goddess was not just a remote, abstract deity. She was the divine mistress of the very creatures that kept the palace's economy from being eaten into oblivion. The reverence for her was reinforced every time a farmer saw a snake in his grain silo and knew his harvest was safe. The figurine is not just a religious icon, it's a celebration of a successful biological strategy. It elevates a practical necessity, keeping snakes around to eat rats, into a profound spiritual truth. The divine and the dirty, the sacred and the slithering, were one and the same. This delicate balance, this fusion of practicality and belief, was what made Minoan civilization so resilient for so long. But it was a balance that could not withstand the ultimate, cataclysmic force of nature that was brewing just to the north of Crete. You stand on the northern coast of Crete, looking out over the calm, blue expanse of the Aegean Sea. The sun is warm. The air is clear. About 70 miles to the north, just over the horizon, lies the island of Thera, a bustling Minoan outpost. From here, on this beautiful day, the world feels stable, permanent. The power of Knossos feels absolute, the balance of nature and civilization held in perfect, perpetual harmony. And then, in an instant, that illusion is annihilated. The glamorous illusion of the Minoan collapse is one of dramatic, cinematic finality. It's the story of Atlantis. In this telling, the volcano on Thera explodes in a single, cataclysmic eruption, the largest the world has ever seen. A pillar of fire and smoke rises into the heavens. The sound is a deafening, world-ending bang. And then comes the great tsunami, a mountain of water that scores the northern coast of Crete, smashing the mighty Minoan fleet to splinters and surging inland to drown the palace of Knossos itself in a single, apocalyptic wave. It's a clean, tragic end. A civilization at its peak, wiped out in a day by a wrathful god or an uncaring nature. It is a myth that gives their demise a certain epic grandeur. But the reality was not so swift. It was infinitely slower, grittier, and more terrifying. The end of the Minoan Golden Age was not a sudden death, but a long, slow, choking sickness. The eruption of Thera was not a single bang, but a prolonged process of horror. First would have come the earthquakes, growing in intensity for days or weeks. Then, the eruption itself. The sound would have been shattering, yes, but it wouldn't have been a single boom. It would have been a continuous, thunderous roar that went on for hours, for days, shaking the very bones of the people on Crete. Then the sky would have gone dark. Not dark like night, but a thick, terrifying blackness at midday, as a colossal plume of ash blotted out the sun, and then the ash began to fall. This is the true, shocking reality of the end. Suffocation by 1,000,000 tons of fine, grey dust. It would have fallen like a soft, silent, endless snow. At first, a light dusting. Then a layer an inch thick. Then several inches. It covered everything. The vibrant green of the terrace farms, the silver of the olive groves, the red-painted columns of the palace all vanished under a uniform, monochromatic blanket of grey. This ash was not like soft wood ash. It was pulverized rock and glass, a fine, abrasive grit. It got into everything. It contaminated the water, turning cisterns and rivers into a foul, acidic sludge. It got into the food. Every mouthful of bread, every bowl of barley porridge, would now be filled with that same horrible grit you imagined before, but 100 times worse, a grit that would wear down teeth and score the insides. The livestock in the fields would eat the ash-covered grass and die, their stomachs clogged with volcanic glass. The crops, smothered under a thick layer of sterile dust, would wither and rot. The entire agricultural base of Crete, built with generations of back-breaking labor, was poisoned and buried in a matter of days. The tsunami was real. It would have obliterated the northern port towns and destroyed the Minoan fleet, the very foundation of their trade empire and their defense. But Knossos, being several miles inland and on high ground, would have been untouched by the wave. Its inhabitants would have survived the flood only to face the slower, more insidious horror of the aftermath. Their navy was gone. Their trade routes were cut. Their farms were barren. Famine would have set in with terrifying speed. The intricate palace economy, with its meticulous records of oil and grain, collapsed. There was nothing left to count. So why did their civilization truly end? Because the Thera eruption didn't just destroy their economy, it shattered their worldview. Their entire religion was based on maintaining a balance with nature through ritual. They believed their priestesses, their bull leaps, even their sacrifices, gave them a measure of control. The eruption proved that to be a lie. No ritual could appease a force like this. The gods had abandoned them. The sun had vanished. The earth itself had turned to poison. This psychological collapse was as devastating as the physical one. This is likely when the most desperate rituals took place with human sacrifices, the potential cannibalism. They were the last, futile screams of a people watching their world die. The final blow was not delivered by nature, but by man. Weakened, starving, and spiritually broken, Minoan Crete was now vulnerable. Within a few generations, a new power from the Greek mainland, The Mycenaeans, a warrior culture of Agamemnon and Achilles, arrived. They did not face the mighty fleet of a confident sea empire, but a broken people in a poisoned land. They took over Knossos, not as conquerors leveling a great city, but more like receivers moving into a bankrupt company. They put their own administrators in charge, and the scribes started writing in a new script, Linear B, to keep accounts in the Greek language. The great Minoan civilization didn't get a noble, dramatic end. It slowly choked on ash, starved, lost its faith, and was quietly absorbed by its more aggressive neighbors. It didn't go out with a bang, it faded out with a long, painful, wheezing sigh. And with that long, final sigh, the story of the Minoans as they were fades from view. The vibrant frescoes, the stinking corridors, the bloody rituals, and the gritty taste of their bread all recede, sinking back into the deep soil of the past. The dust of Thera has long since settled, becoming just another layer in the earth, a silent line in the great book of time. The struggles that felt so immediate, so all-consuming to tempt fear of the gods, the itch of the louse, the terror of the charging bull are now just quiet stories, whispered to you on the edge of sleep. Their world, once so real and visceral, has softened into myth. The sharp edges of their reality have been worn smooth by the endless, gentle tide of centuries. All that urgent life, all that striving and all that suffering is over now. It has all been put to rest, and as their ancient world settles into a peaceful, dreamlike silence, you can feel yourself settling too. The weight of the day, the worries of your own world, can begin to drift away, just as the Minoans themselves have drifted away from us. There is nothing left for you to do but to let go, to float on this quiet current, and to allow the darkness behind your eyes to be as calm and as peaceful as the deepest, most undisturbed chamber in that long-buried palace. Let the gentle rhythm of your own breathing be the only sound that matters now, a soft and steady anchor in the peaceful stillness of the night.